Well, Iran is allowing what it calls friendly countries like India, Russia and China to pass through a designated safe corridor in the Strait of Hormuz. It's a critical development for China, which imports the majority of its oil from the Gulf, including Iran. So what does this tell us about China's positioning in this war and how it's reshaping trade? Well, Bang Xiao from ABC Chinese has been covering the story and joins me now in the studio. Bang, good to have you with us.
Good evening, Girish.
Yeah, look, so we now see that, traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, it's gone to a standstill. But we know that, oil from Iran to China is passing. We know that China confirmed today that 3 of its ships have safely gone through the Strait of Hormuz. So in terms of that, what are you seeing in the data and what does it tell us about the manner, so how global trade is functioning, in the context of this war in the Middle East?
Yes, I think that is a very interesting moment of our history. What the data shows is a sharp contraction, not a collapse. So before the conflict, what you would typically see is that about 30 oil tankers a day going through Hormuz. And now the number is closer to 2. So that is a dramatic drop of more than 90%. And at the same time, even in the past crisis, traffic through Hormuz rarely fall this far because roughly 20% of the global oil supply is relying on this particular route. So this is a very unusual moment. But what's striking is that it hasn't stopped. A large share of what's still moving that is coming out of Iran, and much of that is heading to China. So global trade isn't breaking down, and it's becoming more selective. And under that pressure, traffics are more concentrating around relationships that can still operate despite the risks.
Yeah. So when Iran says that, quote, friendly countries can safely pass through the Strait of Hormuz, is it simply just a logistical move or does it signal something else?
It's framed as logistics, but I think what it's doing is something more political. By naming friendly countries, Iran is effectively drawing a line, not through formal alliances, but through behavior and business. Today, there is a clear economic basis of that. There are more than 60% of the Iranian crude oil exports ended up in China, and often through indirect routes. So these friendly countries are clearly the ones keeping Iran's oil export viable. But we've seen this before after the US sanction back in 2012 and again in 2018. Iran's export dropped dramatically, but also later gradually getting back through alternative channels, largely centered on China. So what matters now isn't really what other countries say, but what countries continue to do, and trade becomes the marker of alignment, because that's what makes this shift really significant.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So far, I know China is such a critical importer of Iranian oil, a big buyer of Iranian oil, but Beijing hasn't taken sides militarily. So what's behind that? And is there any reason for China to tip the balance and perhaps does take a side at some point in the future?
Yeah, China's position on the war is always quite consistent, as we can see. It avoids direct confrontation. You can see that through Israel-Gaza, through the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it also protects its economic interests. Iran offers discounted oil, which is so important for China, and China is the world's largest importer. So there is a clear incentive to continue that relationship. But we also saw China build buffers around this trade relationship as well, increasing purchases and stockpiling in the months leading up to the conflict, which is clearly a sign that gives it more flexibility when the global supply is getting very tight. At the same time, Beijing is very aware of its exposure. It remains deeply integrated into the Western markets for trade, technology, finance, so it cannot really afford to trigger a broader sanction against it. So what you get is a calibrated approach, which means trade continues, but there is limits. China engages with Iran, for sure, but it's also careful about how far it goes.
Yeah, Beijing managing a very fine balance there. Bang Shah from ABC Chinese, really appreciate your insights on the program. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.